Hi there, everyone. Glad to see you all here. It's been a busy day already. It's amazing how uh, life, busy life can be. And it's just great to see you all here. I've got um, Brandy on the other side helping me with the Q&A. She will answer some of your questions and give you some of your links if you're looking for them, and generally just tell me what's what's going on because it's just a little bit confusing. But so glad you've all shown up. We've already got a huge crowd here from all over the world. It's just great to see you all. Um, from Nebraska, from Erie, from England, from St. Louis. Just so glad to have you all here. And we've had a bunch of questions already given to me in the on YouTube. Sorry, in the comments on Instagram and on Facebook. So, excuse me. I'm just going to jump in and just start with some of them. Hello, we've got somebody from Spain, somebody from Brisbane, someone from Oregon. Glad to see you. So, Kiz Torres asked on the last Q&A if I do any other crafts other than quilting. And quilting's a fairly broad spectrum of things that you can do. Like there's embroidery, and there's the actual quilting and the piecing. But I do like to sew. Um, I think my biggest hobby other than quilting is ancestry. I like doing genealogy, but I don't really have a lot of time for that at the moment. But I do like knitting, I do like crocheting, but I haven't done either of them for a little while. I would say the next one after quilting would be embroidery. That's the one I do the most right at the moment. Um, Rees, I think it's Rees or Rise, sorry, C, was given several spools of stretchy thread and don't know what to do, what this is for. Do you? It depends what it is. There's some elasticized thread that you can use in making skirts and things like that. But then there's another poly that has a little bit of stretch and it's got a little bit of fiber to it. And that's used in serging. So you set up 2 or 3 of those and you use that in your serger, and it helps. One, they're supposed to be fairly inexpensive, and 2, it just gives you a fast wrap as you're sewing. Becky McCarty has asked me, thank you for your encouragement on UFOs. Do you just work on one at a time or several at a time? I have been trying very hard in the last year even though I have many projects on the go, I only have 2 projects in my, you might call it front of house. They're on my project board that I grab every day. So I have a fast one that precision's not really so much about it. Sometimes I'm making scrap blocks. Sometimes I'm just making a SCRAPBUSTER, and then I have one where precision is more involved. So it depends on what kind of UFO it is, whether it's in one bucket or the other, but I try to only work on one at a time. At least one at the piecing stage. So I could have another one on the long arm, which unfortunately I haven't used in several weeks, or I could have one at the binding process. But I usually only have one UFO at a time, normally because a UFO has a little baggage with it, and there's only so much baggage you want to deal with at one time. Cat lover, is there such thing as having too many quilts? I think so. I think you can have too many quilts when it impeds your life. Like if you are buying a bigger house to store your quilts, that is just your call on whether you're comfortable with that. But I think you can get too much clutter with quilts. Now, the problem is when you have too many near and dear ones. I think I talked about this last time. You can't take them with you. So, you know, think about some deserving people that can enjoy them. And yes, there's lots of people that can enjoy your quilts, so there is too much. Gloria Marchetto has asked, have you ever, this is from an email. She has asked if I've ever done binding with one color on the front and a different color on the back, and would you have any tips? So the problem with that is, of course, getting that line right at the top of your quilt. So I'm taking this binding right here. So you would have to get that line all the way down the top there. And whether you're painting, whether you're quilting, it's always very hard to negotiate that line. What I would do, and then you've got the fold in the material as well. So you're always going to have one side slightly dominant than the other. So just fold everything to one side as you are quilting, and just give, I would presume you're going to make the fabric on the top roll over onto the fabric onto the back. You just have to be careful. It is definitely an advanced move. I'm going to say hi to Hazel Blair from Spain. I cannot believe I've got so many people here from Spain. Welcome. And Julie Knight from Illinois. Glad you are here. What's next? Dorothy LaBounty has asked, do I like my long arm machine? Is it hard to maintain, and how often do you oil and clean it? Well, it's very similar to a sewing machine. You have to clean it after every time you use it, and I am enjoying it. Unfortunately, as I said, I haven't used it in a couple of weeks. I got a project out, and then I realized I wasn't ready to do it. And I'm just about to get a couple of pillows on there, and they're smaller projects, and I'm about to get some practice piecing. Like, I'm wanting to practice some feathers, and I've been watching a little bit of Angela Walters lately and realizing, you know what, it's time to just sit down and practice and not worry about getting a quilt done. So yeah, so I am really enjoying it. And thread is just a whole other layer to your quilting projects. You realize, you know, you've done all the piecing, and then quilting is just that extra. Not only is there texture, but there's the color and the threads, and that's just a whole new dimension that's brought into my quilting. So I'm looking at it totally differently than I used to. Rhonda, I think you are Rhonda Schelling. I think you are a new subscriber, but you're very vocal. I think you've made a lot of comments on a lot of videos. What are some of the best ways to quilt a 3D quilt? Now, I'm not somebody else has asked me about color in a 3D quilt, how to get your best reactions, best results, I should say. So first of all, you start with color. The way that a 3D a 3D quilt is all about the color and getting the value right. So on the surfaces that are catching the light, you want your brightest hues. And then on the sides, where the shadows fall, you want your darkest desaturated colors, and then you may have even a couple of bright spots where you have desaturated high value colors. So you want to get that layout. You want to choose your colors carefully and make sure you've got that contrast. Now for quilting, I have actually never quilted one, but I would say it's going to be along the very same lines. You want, if you are doing custom quilting and not an all over pantograph, you will want to pay attention to your thread colors to make sure that you carry on that color contrast. And the other thing is, you might change up your pattern depending on where, like in the shadows, you might do something to make it darker, and you might do something in the brighter zones. So I think Angela Walters may have a better answer for that than me. Margie Lane has asked, have you ever tested your own pattern and it turned out horribly wrong? I've never had it turn out horribly wrong, but I definitely have made mistakes. I used to have I've shown my quilt called the Lemonade quilt, where I did all the math and I did it right, but didn't refer to it when I sat down to cut and cut it all wrong. And the lemonade quilt was what I made out of the scraps. I think where a lot of people get tripped up is HSTs need more real estate. Like, you need to cut fabric 1 inch larger than your strips, which are only a 1/2 inch larger. And a lot of people just, they don't make their HSTs the right size. And then your points don't line up, and it goes on from that. But no, I've never had something go horribly wrong because I've done all the math first. But there are ways to fix it. Jude the Obscured has asked, any advice on how to mix large format blocks with blocks that are made up of smaller pieces in the same quilt? So I don't know whether you're trying to do a scattered quilt or make it very, very scrappy, or there is an actual pattern, but I'm going to presume that this is scrappy. You've just got all sorts of blocks and you're trying to put them together. So a very easy way to look at it is to take your big quilt and then you're dividing it up into blocks. And within those blocks, you have blocks, and within those blocks, you have blocks. So if you take a look at my video, block assembly number 1, which was all very scrappy, you could see that I was taking smaller blocks and I was building them up to match larger blocks. So you add strips to the side, you add piecing in strips to grow your blocks to be big enough to fit with the larger blocks. And they don't need to be square, they can be rectangles, but you're always just building those blocks so that you have a bigger block. And I did this actually was something that was done in the Long Time Gone quilt as well. That's not my pattern, that's Jen Kingwell. The very same thing. So there were many places where she used strips to join these bigger squares together, and she often used 1 inch squares to fill in those little blanks where she was short. So that's what I would recommend. Just work backwards or build up. So you've got your big square and you've got your smaller ones, and then you build these up and attach them to the big block, and then you attach your big blocks together. And don't hesitate. If it's scrappy already, just use small 1 inch squares are very small. You don't have to use 1 inch squares. So, yeah. Actually, do I have it here? This is the economy block quilt that was also done that way. So here we have 3 different sizes of economy blocks. These ones are 10 inch, these ones are 2.5, and these ones are 5. So you see how we just used blocks to pull it all together. Yeah. One question I got from my video this week, Sewing on the Go, was about English paper piecing. People are always very concerned about the papers, and do they not get mushy in the wash and things like that. Well, you take the papers out. So this is a project that I've been working on. So it's pretty big right at the moment. And this is what the back looks like. And these papers, once you sew a block to another block, you can take the paper out. So I haven't taken these papers out yet because I'm just wanting to keep the shape as I'm auditioning fabrics that are going to go next to it. But anything that's in the middle here can come out. And you just pull them. These ones were attached with glue, so you just pull them out. Now, some people have them, some people sew in their papers, and then you just snip the basting stitch and they come out. So, and it's debatable whether one's more easy over the other. And the other question that I was asked, so you can see this becomes quite soft as you're sewing it others together. Yeah, so it survives without these inside. You just want to keep the papers in these ones all on the outside so that the pieces maintain their shape as you're sewing them to the next block. And then people ask whether you can reuse these pieces of paper. Yes, you can. This set of papers for this quilt, I actually purchased from someone else, so they've already been used once, but I could say that they could at least be used one more time. You know, they're not perfect, but they can still be used because they can still hold their shape. The points, what happens is sometimes the points get soft or you rip them, but it's only paper. It's only paper. This isn't your quilt, so you can make them again. The other question I got a lot was about my hexie punch. So this is a Fiskars one. I bought it very impulsively from Michael's one day when I was in there with a coupon. And how Fiskars measures the size of their hexagon is what kind of circle this goes into. So they consider this a 1.5-inch hexie. But in quilting, we measure hexies by the size of the side here. And so this is like a 3/4-inch hexie. And these are the ones that I use just because they go with the punch. But I have a friend that is doing 1/4-inch. Like, I mean, they are so tiny. And I have another one that does 3/8. And then I have another one that she works with the full 1-inch ones. So everybody has a favorite size they want to work with, and you do you. So lots of requests for a video on English paper piecing and foundation paper piecing, because that's something quite separate. So I'm going to dig down and see what I can do. Janet Gorey it's not a question, but she's a suggestion. Instead of snipping the dodgers, we trim the sails. I think they look a little like sailboats sailing along the edges of our blocks. Yes. You know, some people, you know, different people. I think what she's talking about is these little flaps here. And some people like to trim them and some people don't. So it's your call. Okay, we've got some, oh, Raven Smoke Dancer is here. Raven's been with me for a long time and we've had a lot of fun chats together. Stacy Bell has asked, in English paper piecing, when I zigzag, I catch the paper, and when I remove the paper, I loosen the threads. Any suggestions? Just don't pull quite as tightly. When you remove the paper, just do it slightly. Yeah, maybe you need a tighter stitch on your sewing while you're sewing, but you should be okay. Jean Bray has asked, can you use serger thread to quilt? Serger thread, it depends. Some serger thread well, one serger thread is polyester normally, and two, the threads that are the ones that go around the outside, that type of sergering thread is meant to be hard. It's just not, it's white and often not the best, not as high quality as other threads that it's just designed to be cheap because you use so much of it. So I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying you may just want to watch the quality, do a couple of tests with it. But there's certainly been times when I've used serger thread to make quilts. So yes. Victoria Robinson, I know you do after quilts where you use up extra blocks in the back. Have you ever done a fully reversible quilt? Well, I think you can say that my quilts are considered reversible, but where you get into problems is in the quilting, and I think that's probably where you're asking is Um, and I have definitely seen totally reversible quilts. I have never gone that lengths because it really is quite fiddly trying to get everything to line up. And when I'm in that home stretch there, I may start off with the idea that I'm going to do everything perfect, but then um, I'm not ready for those fiddly things at the end. But you can do it. The trick is that you just have to take extra steps. You need to maybe do some basting stitches along because you don't want the quilt to move. You've got to do more management of the back. Where your back is normally your base. Now you've got to be careful that your 3 layers are perfectly together. And what I mean by that is when you make your sandwich, you've got your backing, your batting, and your quilt top. But often when you're quilting, your top is migrating a bit. And that's why you start in the middle and move out to the edges, or you start at the top and you move towards the bottom. And there's a lot of management of the bottom of the quilt because it begins to flare, it begins to gather, and all that extra material begins to work. And when you are trying to make a totally reversible quilt, now you've got to manage it. You've got to micromanage that. And you've got to make sure that your back is moving together at the same rate as your front. And I'm not saying it can't be done. I know I've seen the quilt that won Houston in 2000, I think it was 2019, was fully reversible, and it was just a brilliant quilt. I mean, I cannot tell you how amazing the quilting and piecing was on that quilt, but it did take a lot of time for that quilter to make it. So I think the better thing to do is to make a simple design on the back, because then you have an option with your front. Your front is very pieced and very traditional, and then your back can be very modern. So you're, depending on your mood, you can have a different quilt. Emergency hugs. I've just seen that go by. What are good projects to take on short trips away when you can't take your sewing machine with you? Love your video. Well, I just did a video last week on that, sewing on the go. All sorts of little projects that you can take. Hand sewing kits that you can build and take them on the go with you when you don't have your sewing machine. Marilyn Beale has asked, hand embroidery and machine quilting. What do you recommend I start with first when I want both on a quilt? Do the quilting first and then, well, it depends on what layers you're going through. If you're just quilting on the top, I would do the embroidery on the top first. But if you're quilting and then you're doing embroidery stitches through all 3 layers, I would do the quilting first and then the embroidery, because again, it's that migration that happens, and you want your embroidery to shine. Nathan Cap has asked, is it better to store them vertically or horizontally? I'm not quite sure what you're talking about there. What are we storing? Don Whitting has asked, are you still working on the Milli Fiore quilt? My Milli Fiore is in its last year of the 5-year plan, and I'm at the point where I'm sewing. I've got 2 hexagons left, and I'm at the point where I'm sewing these together. But I'm hesitant to bring the project out to sew them together while I have a puppy in the house, because I just feel the quilt is very long, it drags below me, and I can just see these little jaws grabbing at it. So I've been trying to get some brain space together to attempt those last 2 hexagons, and I've got some fabric, but I overthink my hexagons so much. I need at least like 2 or 3 days of hardcore sitting down, auditioning fabrics, playing with everything, and I really am hoping to get at it. And then I'm second guessing something that I've done previous. Should I take it out? And then I have to slap myself going, you don't pull out hand stitching if you don't have to. So that's where I am on my Milli Fiore. I really, really hope that I will have it done by December, the end of December. Kathleen from Ohio, how do you feel about lace on a quilt? Where is the best place to add some in a quilt as you go? Well, I've seen some absolutely fabulous quilts done with lace, and that is a personal taste. I've seen lace done as framing. I've seen old lace napkins and tablecloths just quilted as a whole quilt. Um, I've just done. I've just seen so many different ways of doing it. It's beautiful stuff. It adds texture, and I'm not attracted to it because it's white, and I don't deal with those really light colors of lace. Um, but there's lots of ways to do it. You can add it after you can do your piecing and then quilt it on top. You can incorporate it into your piecing. When I first started quilting, I saw a master quilt. She had won some big AQS award, and she made her own lace. She had actually, through her sewing machine and embroidery, she had made her own lace, and she had a quilt. Then she had this um, translucent lace, and then she had another border around it. And that took her, I think it took her like 5 to 6 years. So, because she had some problems. So, but yes, experiment, have fun. Yeah. Tiny Orchards has just shown up and said her Milli Fiore became a table runner. Yes, it definitely. I'm glad I said at the beginning when I started that it was a 5-year plan, because I would have felt incredible pressure and I might have given up. But because I said that right at the very beginning with the very first post, this is the beginning of a 5-year plan, and it's given me a lot of comfort when I would think, oh, I haven't worked on it. But I think, no, I still have time. Nana Liz sewed rickrack on a baby quilt, and even using a walking foot, it made the fabric a little bit wavy. How do I fix this in the future? I would just practice, because there is your presser, like your layers of fabric are going through your presser foot, but we think that they're all going through at the same rate, but they're not. They're all going through at different rates. And it's how you have your needle and it grounds the fabric, and then you have your hands pulling the fabric. And an experienced and professional sewers understand how hard they have to hold that fabric to get that material going through at the same time. So you just have to practice and just feel the tension that you need to get through them. You may want to tack your rickrack down with a little bit of glue so it doesn't travel so much. You may baste it so it doesn't travel so much. So I'm not quite sure which way it waved, whether it was the fabric underneath that waved, or which would stretch, the fabric underneath or the rickrack. So you just need to practice a little bit and just examine which one is doing the moving and how can you secure them so that they don't. Janet, I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. Sorry, Janet. Janet Hootapole. Just picked up Goats in Pajamas pattern. Read it through and it looks challenged. You mentioned doing it. How did it turn out? Any tips? So I made a couple of these blocks for a friend last year. And I found it challenging. And then I took John's class. It was I forget whether it was a half day or a full day class on how to make the block. And he had all sorts of great pointers on how to do that. Excuse me. I'm going to, if you are interested in that, I'm going to put a link to John's website, and maybe Brandy can do that. Put a link to John's website in the notes. And I would recommend taking that class with him if you make one and you find it really challenging, because he's got a couple of really good pointers. Nadine Merrick has asked, have you ever hand sewn foundation paper piecing like you do EPP. No. No. If I can sew something, I will sew something. Hand sewing is slow sewing, and hand sewing can be very therapeutic. It can be like I know when my son was sick, I did a lot of hand sewing. That was just really all my brain could take. But it also allows you to release the present. It's a time where you can daydream a bit and you can listen to stories, and it's a very different pace. And I find I often have a lot of it's very hard for me to get into that headspace except very late at night, while I'm watching TV with my family. So if I have an opportunity to sew something, I will sew it. That's my long answer to a fairly quick. Lisa has asked, do I own an AccuQuilt? Thoughts? Cutting fabric is my favorite part of quilting. I do love, and it's a close second behind planning and doing the math and all that. I love that part of the process. And the idea of getting an AccuQuilt does not appeal to me because I like lining up my rulers, trying to be as accurate as possible. Just the whole sound of the ruler and scissors going through fabric, and lining them up and making piles, that gives me a lot of satisfaction. Now, I know there's a lot of people that don't get that. I have a couple of friends that have AccuQuilts for a variety of reasons. One doesn't like it, and one can no longer do the cutting because of arthritis in her hands, and they swear by it. So it's up to you. My husband bought me a silhouette last year thinking that that would be a better way to cut fabric, and totally useless for fabric, and I have no interest in figuring out how to do it because, again, I like cutting fabric. So only you will know whether it's worth the investment. The other thing is I also didn't want to get into the clutter of it. Not only do you buy the AccuQuilt, but you've got to get all the dies to go with it. And it's not just this one, but all those type of things. It's not just one thing that you need. You need many things to go with it. And I don't know exactly how they work, so I don't really want to go off on a tangent there. But there's a lot of accessories that you often need, and then you need to store that stuff. Okay. Crafty Librarian. If you do not wash your fabric, how do you get the grains straight? Refold and iron. I'm new and not sure how to start my cuts. Well, Crafty Librarian, it is not as important in quilting to get the grain straight as it is in other, when you're sewing garments, because there's no gravity with the fabric the same way. And we often sew on biases, and we're fussy cutting around patterns and things like that. So it's not the same way. It's not as important as when you're making a garment. But that said, you straighten it out the very same way that you would with the other fabric. You grab it on the bias, and you stretch it. You just give it a tug, just depending on which way you need to pull it. There's certain quilts that I've gone to the effort of doing this, but the majority of quilts I don't. It's just never, once you get the quilt, once you piece it and then you tack it down with quilting, it's not moving, or it's not moving enough that you need to worry about where the grain was. Before we get to the end, I think we're, what are we at right now? We are at 37 minutes, but before I'll answer a couple more questions, but I am just letting you all aware that I am speaking at Festival of Quilts next week. It's called Color, Energy, and Those Darn UFOs. And it's about finding your color zone. And I hope you'll show up. And there is a link on my website to that. what are the current videos? Last week I did sewing on the go. My last interview. Oh boy, some days my brain just goes terribly. My last interview was with Zakia Pierce of Cozy Quilts for Quilters, and it was about making quilts for disadvantaged youth that's going off to university. And I'm actually just finishing up a batch of blocks. I'm going to make a quilt and send it off to her. And next May, I am going on a cruise, and I hope you'll join me. It is, I believe it's May 13th to 22nd. It is going from Vancouver to Alaska, and not only will there be many meet and greets, but I'm hoping to organize an excursion to the local quilt stores along the way. And there will be a couple of classes I'll be teaching during the cruise. So if you're like me and anxious to think about getting out in the world a little bit after these 2 years, check that out too. Let's see. Marg 4. Do I use pre-filled bobbins when piecing? I don't use them when I piece. These are bobbins that come filled with thread already from the supplier, but I do use them in my long arming. I honestly thought I would never use them. I did take them for a test drive at one point and just thought it was something that wasn't going to be useful, and I'm finding it incredibly useful when I'm long arming. So yeah, never say never. Donna T, back to my hexagon quilt, my new hexagon quilt. Do you end up squaring your hexagon quilts, or do you finish them as a hexagon? I have chosen to fill in my hexagon. So along this side here, I have made small pieces. I have actually taken a hexagon piece and I have made matching pieces to go along the side. So I have a straight edge. But the pattern did not come with that. It did come with pieces that you could have like just used for like a solid fabric and filled those in on the outside. But I chose to copy the hexagon pattern through those. So it looks a little bit different. But that's what I do. I know some people applicate it onto a bigger piece. So there's many different ways to deal with that edge. Jackie Heaney, I just got she just got her kinship pattern from Gnome Angel. And she's never fussy cut anything in her life. She has such beautiful fabric, but she has no clue how to start. Well, I recommend that you look at some of Gnome Angel's blogs, because she is the queen of fussy cutting. She also has a book called The Fussy Cutters. Is it the Fussy Cutters Handbook or the Fussy Cutters Club? But again, a lot of good technique about it. The most important thing I find when you're fussy cutting is you need to use a lot of starch, because when you fussy cut, your pieces will end up off grain. And therefore, when you sew them to another piece of fabric, they will stretch. And I'm amazed at how much they stretch. As I've been moving through my kinship, I've been adding more and more starch, and I'm getting the better result that I'm looking for. Now, you don't need to fussy cut all your blocks. Just remember that. A little fussy cutting goes a long way. Like in this quilt, I have fussy cut. I've got a couple of fussy cut pieces here, and there's one up here that you can't see. And that can be enough to add interest to a quilt. You don't need to have every single piece of every single block fussy cut. So I would start small and start with your comfort level. You can also start on grain. If you're using Tula Pink fabrics, she's got so much pattern that goes right across that you can do it on grain. You can just go across and not twirl them around. So again, go to Gnome Angel's website, and I think you'll find some good tips there. Tiny Orchard Quilts has asked, will I be at QuiltCon in February? I'm still on the fence right at the moment. Mainly, I'm taking a look at the COVID rates in Arizona. I'm not taking any classes, but I have a feeling that if everything is going well in Arizona, I will probably catch book a flight in January, but I'm going to wait to find out. But I'd love to catch up for a cup of coffee if you want. Kim Sackett has asked, what type of material is good for a weighted quilt? There are ways of putting weight into a quilt, but you can just make a heavy quilt out of heavier fabric. So denim makes a great weighted quilt. I made my Sugary Dew quilt out of linen, and that added a beautiful weight to it. You can also double bat your quilts. That will add weight to your quilt. So without putting in any stones or any beads or anything inside the quilt to weight it down, you could take denim, double bat it, use linen. It just depends on that weight. But that Sugary Dew quilt I gave to my son, and he loves the weight of that. Like, he finds it really, really comfortable to sleep in at night. So you don't need to do a lot. Do we have any more? Or are we at the end here? What time are we at? Oh boy, I can do one more question. Pam Walker has asked, what could I use for the inside of a lightweight quilt? There are lots of versions of batting. Some of them are very, very light. But many people have used just a sheet or a piece of flannel just to make it very, very light. You just as you're, and some people have even written that they've never put anything in the middle. They've just quilted 2 layers together. But my gut is that you want something there just to use as the sandwich to put it together. Maybe I need to do a couple of experiments to find that out. Anyways, thank you so much, everyone, for showing up today. It has been just lovely having you, just seeing you from all over the world. It's I've been feeling a little bit lonely this week. I've been really working hard on a couple of projects, and I've been in my little bit dome, so this has been really great for my soul. And if you don't yet, please hit that subscribe button down below. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Just Get It Done Quilts. And of course, any of my STASHBUSTER patterns, and sign up for my newsletter on my website at Just Get It Done Quilts. Okay? So take care, guys, and I will see you. I'm just going to get my things here, my scenes. And I will see you next time. Take care.